Okay. Hello. My name is Brian Skull. Welcome to the first episode of my podcast, Classically Trained Nobody, podcast slash YouTube channel. And I figured I would do this first episode as just sort of an introduction to who I am and what I do and what's the point of the damn thing. What's the point of the podcast, right? Why does anybody want to listen? Why should anybody want to listen? Well, it's all about me. Now, I've been tossing around the idea to do a podcast for a while now, and like normal, I fuck things, overthink things completely, and so this is after a year of considering about all the ins and outs of what I would do and why I would do it. I figured I'm just going to do it. I'm a gamer. I love video games, and the YouTube channel I want to be sort of about games in some way. You know, I want to stream more. I want to talk about art. I say classically trained, and that's in the title. Classical training is an interesting term, and I'll probably get into it more in the future because I do plan on having people on and talking to my friends mostly, but people who are very smart and very much worth talking to and have a lot of experience to bring to the table for people to hear about. For instance, so from where I'm coming from with the classical training, if you ask every single artist what the word classical means, and you're going to get potentially a different answer every time. That's the tricky thing about the word classical. I mean, it's anything from like 50 to 5,000 years ago. But that's sort of people confusing historical and art terms, and you know, one word like classical has so many different meanings. In terms of what it means for me is that it was the icing on the cake for education, where I was concerned. The classical method, in this sense, is talking about a method that was formulated in the 19th century by the French, by an artist named Jean-Léon Gérôme and Charles Bargue, and there's an entire drawing course and classical painting course that you can take now through what's called an atelier. And really, when you talk about classical, you talk about something that's extremely rigorous. And I have classical training in more than one field. I was first trained as a dancer. I took dancing in my teenage years, mostly because the girls were cute, but primarily, well, I mean, I was there. My sister wanted to be a dancer, ballerina. Always wanted to be a ballerina. I've always wanted to be an artist. And so I was hanging out at the studio and drawing and being bored and playing hacky sack, because that's what you did back then. You played the fuck out of some hacky sack. And I always thought tap dance was really cool. And so I got the opportunity to do it for cheap. I think it was just a short introductory course to tap dance. And my mom was friends with the owner of the studio, got a dance studio at the time. And so I jumped in. And I'll probably talk more about dancing later in later podcast. But in short, I went from my first class to skipping over to more advanced classes, and suddenly I'm taking ballet, and then suddenly I'm competing, and I'm in Las Vegas, and things moved very quickly. But it was a lot of rigorous study, and that was my first sort of introduction to, especially taking ballet, is essentially the classical method as far as the arts go, where you're considering dance. You it's all about form and discipline and being fully aware of what you're doing and why. And it is the exact opposite of contemporary modern dance, which I've also done, but has to rely heavily on the ballet, whether it wants to admit it or not, for strength. So you can almost find every form of dancing in ballet if you look hard enough, and that's what makes it such a foundational method to learn that goes across the board of athletics. So having that experience, and then transitioning, going to college, and I went to college for way too long, looking for the method, looking for knowledge. I realized really quickly that I wasn't going to make it in college going the normal route because of being dyslexic and being completely disabled. So dumb when it comes to math. Cannot do math to save my life. So I realized I would bounce around, take what I needed to take to get into the courses that I needed to get into. And I moved from college to college over the course of 7 years. See, it's those numbers again. 7 years. And then I found the Ravenswood Atelier, and after having reading about the Atelier method, you read about David and all throughout the Romantic era, and just the big schools that they had, and then reading about that and this sort of romantic notion of going to this grand school where the principal drive is to be the greatest representational artist that you can be, and I've been obsessed with history painting and, more importantly, narratives. I've always loved narratives. Who doesn't love a fucking story? Honestly, everybody loves narratives. I love narratives from the perspective of from the art perspective on how to craft something, it goes deeper than that. Whereas there are a lot of people who enjoy narratives, and sort of like how I enjoy classical music, I enjoy it knowing that I'm not going to play it, and so there can be some magic to it. I guess magic is just another way of saying I'm ignorant. I'm completely ignorant to the methods of composing a symphony. Although I have a good idea, given how hard it is to make a painting and talking to all the musicians I know. But anyway, I can turn my brain off. And a lot of people want to do that. When it comes to narratives with pictures, I do not turn my brain off. I want to know exactly how it works, and I want to know how to do it in all ways possible. And I'm kind of really, really greedy like that when it comes to knowledge. I view representational art as this undiscovered country where I can forever push in every direction imaginable and never reach the top, never reach a ceiling. Of course, I'll reach my personal limit, but I've yet to reach my personal limit with painting and drawing, and hopefully I never do, because I consider every painting and every drawing I do as a way to push and gain knowledge that I didn't before have, and I'm addicted to that, and I've been addicted to that since I started when I was a little kid. The first time I ever tried painting, it was a horse. It was a terrible horse, and it was in acrylic, and I remember how terrible it was, how shitty I was, and how difficult it was, and thinking to myself, I don't think I'm ever going to do that again. And I went and I told my mom that after she bought me the paints. I was like, man, that was really hard. I don't know if I want to do that again. And of course, I did it again, obviously, and I've had that sort of back and forth feeling ever since. Every time I paint, it's like, oh, this sucks. I'm never going to do it again. I hate it. And then like an addict, I'm back. So I'll always come back. I will always come back. It will be my drug of choice till the day I die. And I have a lot of stupid education. So having many years of going to school and studying various subjects, philosophy being one of them, and taking an interest in history and learning about representational art, and the entire way through sort of being a gamer and being in love with comic books and animated movies and just geeky shit in general. Batman and the Hulk. I mean, I grew up loving the Hulk, loving Bruce Banner, watching that show with Lou Ferrigno. It was awesome. I love it. And I love it still. And so this is sort of a channel / podcast that is going to be dedicated to all of these things. But I guess it's not all going to be fun and games. And I do plan on addressing more difficult topics. There are a number of things that I want to talk about that I think is good to talk about. If things go well, I'll hopefully have my cousin on. I haven't talked to him about it yet, but I'm sure he'll be down. I don't want to talk about what it was like growing up in a cult. I was raised as a Jehovah's Witness, and up until the age of, well, that's difficult. It took a number of years to leave, but about 16 was when I decided to go, and I didn't feel free until 19 or so. So it took about 3 years to leave the cult of the Jehovah's Witnesses, and so that made for an interesting life so far. Things have been quite different than they would normally. I think there's a lot of Jehovah's Witnesses, but there's not a lot of Jehovah's Witnesses compared to Christians and compared to the amount of people living in America, per se. So I want to get into that. I want to talk about other aspects of, mental health. Mental health is a big, important aspect of life to me because of just from personal experiences and having friends. I have more than one friend who's schizophrenic. I suffer from being bipolar and anxiety disorders, or just, I guess, anxiety. And so it comes and goes, but it mostly comes, and so it can make for a really interesting life if you don't destroy yourself along the way, trying to get everyone back for believing that you were wronged in life. So, and that and given the state of things, given how confusing everything is right now, I think it's also important that more people talk, more people discuss things, more people share ideas and express those ideas and talk about them rationally. We need to hold on to rational dialogue. We can't let that go. The funny thing was about being raised a very conservative Christian in a very abusive, oppressive family and cult was that you come out of it understanding the conservative mindset, being primarily that tradition is key and things should stay the same, and then you tie that into religion, and it's more about only God can enact change, and God being this overseer to all the conservative values. But So I understand that mindset. When I listen to religious conservatives or just conservatives in general talk, I really understand what they're talking about. But then, I jumped from one cult to another, and I went right into the liberal arts school, and was in it for a while, and that's the completely opposite mindset. And so, in being an artist, that openness and the desire to learn and the desire to change is and always will be very addicting. For as anxiety-inducing as it is still addicting to me. And for as terrified as I've ever been in my life, I've never let it stop me do the things that I want to do. It's just I'm terrified as it happens. But it mainly ties into, the sense of purpose that you get from growing up in a cult. Can feel very similar to the sense of purpose that you get from, being in a college-like atmosphere, depending on the scenario. The idea that you're there to change the world is very prominent in both worlds. It's just how they tell you that you can change the world. And so when I hear liberals speak, I understand what they're saying. Considering myself a classical liberal and having gone to college and understanding where they're coming from and understanding where the other side is coming from, it could be very confusing. Mainly what I'm getting at is that I understand both sides, and at least I feel like I do. And for as nonsensical as both sides seem to each other, I think figuring that out is important. This is one of the aspects that I love about considering history is I look back to times like I did a painting about the Spanish Civil War, which I plan on highlighting, probably doing a more in-depth episode about it, because there's just so much to unpack. But the Spanish Civil War is a really good place to look at if you want to see what identity politics looks like, and it's in a real vicious form, and what happens when both sides stop talking to each other, because you had two very different worldviews going at one another, and on all fronts. What made the Spanish Civil War unique historically was how big of a role women played in the fighting, and that's feminism was really a factor in the Spanish Civil War amongst the colliding political ideologies. So looking at that area, but then what makes history so fascinating is, you can go further back, and I'm really fascinated with the Romantic era. In the Romantic era of art, you saw the birth of all the isms that we have today fighting, and they came to be in their most vicious, ugly forms in the Romantic movement. And the funny thing about that is the more I read up about the Romantic movement, the more I see a common thread running through the sentiments that people have, especially artists have, about the world that they live in. And, you can sum it up into two different camps. It's kind of summed up nicely, the two different camps, where you have, you go back to the Romantic era and you have the neoclassical movement and David and the role he played conservatively in politics. And then you have the opposite of that. You have Delacroix, and you have the Romantics. Goya, for instance. They're just powerhouses of the imagination, combined with this emotional response to what was going on in empathy and in subject matter. Things started to shift, and things were shifting because people were feeling overwhelmed, and they were feeling overwhelmed for very much the same reasons that people say that they're overwhelmed with now. Technology is taking over. Well, the Industrial Revolution, right? People felt like technology was taking over. You had all these different camps going back and forth. Through the Enlightenment, people had been convinced that science was going to save them and solve all their problems. And it just sounds so familiar of the personality types and the beliefs that you can encounter even on a daily basis, just talking to people. And I think people feel confused and overwhelmed in very much the same way. And, I live in Michigan now, and I've lived here for over a year. And one of the things that I've noticed is, art is a big part of life here in Michigan, and from people that you wouldn't even expect. People who you could write off normally as being just dumb fucking hillbillies, will suddenly come up to you and talk to you with this great appreciation of, say, the Sublime, right? And I find that theme really common in Michigan. People are here because of nature, and they talk about it as if it's this great overwhelming force that they love to be awed by. And even people who I disagree with the most politically have these feelings, have these sentiments, and so you see, going back to the Romantic movement, you see the Sublime take hold, and even though it had been known about before in history, going all the way back to the Greeks, you see the Sublime take hold as an artistic movement, part of the Romantic movement, and sort of a response to many different things, but some of them being this abandoning countryside where everyone was leaving for the cities, right? And so there's this sentiment for the country life sort of emerging, and for the old ways, sentiment for the old ways of when things were better and people lived in the country, and the country had more civilization. So you get these large landscapes with very small people in them, this overwhelming force of nature. You can look at Turner. Turner is fantastic for that. Completely ahead of his time, and just pushed the boundaries when it came to how much you could abstract nature. And the general philosophy is that if beauty was to be found in light and color, then why did it matter what the subject was, so long as you were using light and color? If that's on any sort of form whatsoever, and you're conveying a message, if the light and color is beautiful, can't you then portray something that would be horrible or otherwise horrible in a beautiful way, making it digestible? And people really latched onto that, and they latched onto that for a number of reasons, some of them being that the Romantic movement happened to be kicked off by the I'm gonna forget the fucking date, 1755 Lipson earthquake in Spain. There was a lot of tragedy, in other words. A record earthquake, 9.5 on the Richter, I believe, just rocked the world, rocked Europe through Spain. And then various conflicting political viewpoints sort of spread, and these things aren't connected. I'm just listing the various things that come up around this time. You have great natural disaster, and science doesn't explain it, even though science Everyone had been told that science would save us, right? Earthquake happens, plagues happen, death is still happening, right? Science is still not explaining it, right? God can't explain it. And all that's left is feeling very small in the face of overwhelming forces, both natural and societal, both by man and by nature. People are feeling overwhelmed on all sides, right? Because times are changing quickly, and people don't know how to react, and as more people are moving to the city, more things are happening, right? So I did a whole lecture on the Romantic movement and how that related to mental health that I think I should eventually elaborate on, covering different artists, but various artists throughout that time. The main theme of the lecture ended up being that, the mental health of the people being portrayed or the people making the work is sort of part of the work all throughout this time period. Even in, like, say, the Orientalist stuff, where it might not seem like it would have anything to do with the politics at the time, but of course, knowing the history, you can always elaborate upon that, and you can see how things connect, how it connects to the larger movement, and how that movement is a reflection of the things going on in society. So that's that. That is that. That's just the introduction. Introduction to hopefully more interesting things, where I get to talk about art. All the arts. I love art. I fucking love it. It's my life, and I want to do more with it, and that's why I'm doing this podcast, to do more with art, to talk about it, and but to also talk about the things that inspire us to make art, and that's nitty-gritty, gross stuff sometimes. But one of the things that I wanted to do, closing up, is take the time to talk about something that I'm into right now, or anything that I'm reading or playing or listening to, just to highlight artists who I like, and because why not spread the love? And so I have always loved books like Wind in the Willows. I grew up on Wind in the Willows, and a part of me will always be an illustrator at heart for that reason. I am doing more illustration, and I want to do more of it because of how effective I think books like Wind in the Willows are, or were, in giving you these really beautiful shots, pictures, drawings, and paintings that showed you just enough to set the theme of the story, and really the entire feeling of the scene itself. And then you'd have the rest of the story. You would read it and flip through. I love the illustrations in The Wind in the Willows. I picked up David Peterson, his book Mouse Guard, Fall 1152, and it really reminded me of The Wind in the Willows, and I know he's done some art concerning that, and I don't know enough about it, so I'll just shut up there. But I'm on the second chapter of Mouse Guard. I've always loved the art of Mouse Guard, and I've always told myself, one day I'm going to check that out, and the closer I get to finishing up the series of paintings that I'm currently working on, the more I'm thinking about, doing more narrative work, more storytelling, more words, and so my mind has been heading in that direction. And friends of mine and we went to Comic-Con this year, and I met David, and I just said, fuck it, I'm gonna buy this book and and dive in. And he's an amazing artist and a nice person. And check it out. If you haven't seen or heard of Mouse Guard, you should look it up and look up David Peterson. I know he's got an Instagram account, so follow him. What else? What else am I doing? I'm playing Divinity Original Sin on PlayStation 4. It was re-released, and it's the special super duper edition. I want to eventually do some streaming of that, probably like an hour's worth, and just to go over the game. But I'll tell you, it reminds me of Baldur's Gate 2, and I fucking loved Baldur's Gate 2. I fucking loved it. It was amazing. Baldur's Gate 2 helped me quit smoking. I started smoking young, and being a rebellious teenager, trying to escape his cult. He's gonna kill himself, and I have asthma, so that's how stupid I was. Smoked with asthma, kids, and so I was trying to quit. And it took a long time to quit. It took like 6 months to quit, and like the last few weeks of it was spent in my room playing Baldur's Gate 2, staring at the screen, killing anything that moved. It reminds me of that game because there's a strong traditional element to it, and it doesn't hold your hand as many RPGs tend to do. Games, more so now than I think ever before, are kind of like follow the trail, just the next marker, and then you follow the next marker, and you follow the little trail of breadcrumbs, and you did this game and you completed it, and it was just like this linear track under the guise of this three-dimensional world that you can explore. A lot of games really do the work for you, in that they show you where to go next without you having to figure it out. Divinity is not like that at all. You pick up a book and you read it. If you don't save that book, you lose the information that's in it. If you needed it to get a clue for something, for instance. And the update to your log, updating the quest, isn't going to necessarily tell you the information that you need to know that would be in that book, for instance. So you have to go and read. You have to actually read, which is common in RPGs, but you have to do it in a critical way, in that you put the pieces together. It doesn't connect the dots for you. You have to connect the dots, and that's how a lot of the missions run. All the missions run. It's just some of them are far easier to see where to go than the next, and there are quest markers, but not for all the quests. Just for main people to talk to. And you don't always know whether or not you've completed a quest. It's not always easy to tell, So I guess that would be one aspect that would be a downfall to the game. But I think if you're paying attention, you don't have that problem. So it's a game that you really have to pay attention to. It's very strategic, sort of top-down, three-quarter view. Or it can be top-down, but you get mostly a three-quarter view. There are a lot of fun little nuanced things about it, like the spell animations and the sort of, there's one spell, the rain spell, right? And there's a real nuanced sort of movement the caster does with their arms, and they turn. And as they do it, their gesture, it's really well done. It's really well animated, even though it's really smaller figures. So the movements themselves and the figures, because a lot of times with those kinds of games, they sort of skimp out on the animation because it's much smaller. There's a lot of detail in this game. A lot of good architecture. There's a lot of good... The artistic direction is really good. I think the only thing that falls short is like the character profiles and like the box artwork and stuff. I think the art could have been stronger. for how good of a game it is, the cover box art especially, but the character portraits and whatnot could have been done better. It's the only thing that's lacking, I think. That's just being really nitpicky. But aside from that, the game is just feels like an old school, classic D&D adventure. But the story is very interesting, and so it's not an old kind of story. There's time travel involved, and I'm a sucker for time travel. So if there's time travel and it's a fantasy RPG, it sort of turns it into a sci-fi fantasy RPG. With sci-fi fantasy, you can do absolutely anything, and that's the best part of it. So there's this time aspect to it, and yeah, overall, it's a really good game. I've been playing it, and the battle system is really solid, and it works on spells. There's spells play a really heavy role, but the elemental elements play a real heavy role in influencing how you do battle, and with environmental effects. Certain barrels and boxes can explode. Certain spells are meant only to spread fire or set yourself up for an elemental reaction, which is also common in like Baldur's Gate 2, but they go further with it. I think there's more combinations, and I do believe you end up getting more spells than you normally would in a traditional D&D game. So at least it feels like that at this point in the game, and I'm like, I think I'm more than halfway through it. I have so many spells to choose from. It's a lot of fun. It's like the battles feel like chess with spells. So, all right. Well, that is it. I am going to wrap this up. I said I was only going to go for a half hour. I went for 38 minutes. I'm a liar. I'm a rotten, dirty liar. Anyway, that concludes the first episode of Classically Trained Nobody. This is Brian Skoll. I will be chatting at you later.